and this is TexMac's Webinar Wednesdays. Again, this is TexMac Direct with Happy Embroidery Machines, as you can see in the background. And today's lesson will be on the ABCs of sewing on ball caps. So we'll get started here shortly. It looks like we've got our few people arriving, which is great. We're very excited here to show you guys and break down the mystery of sewing on ball caps. And I'm here to share with you that ball caps are a highly profitable aspect of embroidery, and you need not be afraid of them. One of the things that we look for is to teach you guys the fundamentals, and if you understand how ball caps are different and how they behave differently, then this will actually take the mystery out of this, and it'll also lower the learning curve so that you can go on and start making a good profit with this type of embroidery. So one of the things that we're going to start out with is that just like garments, regular flat garments, there are different kinds of ball caps, and one of the big differences that we're seeing, especially these days, is that what seems to be in fashion now. When I grew up and I was buying ball caps for myself, we had curved bills, and then we had sort of what's called a medium profile cap. Now we see with youth caps a more urban kind of spin to this. And I realize that I kind of have a dark shirt with a dark ball cap here, so I'm going to try and offset this a little bit. And what you're seeing now is that you have, number one, a taller field, and that allows for a larger logo. And that seems to coincide with what a lot of people are really liking these days. And also you have a flatter brim. So that presents a couple of different problems. Number one, the taller field requires a stiffer material, so that can get a little bit challenging to sew on. And number two, the flat brim also presents its own problems. So the most important thing, and I'm going to generalize out here a little bit, is that be aware that there are different kinds of ball caps. They all present slightly different problems. So what may work on one type of ball cap, like this traditional brush twill cap, may not work on this, or may need some modification. So be aware that there are several kinds of ball caps out there, and that way you know not to approach everything with a one-size-fits-all. We'll get a little bit more into that. I will make one more distinction, is that in these ball caps, if you are new to this, that it's very important that when you are sewing and you're starting out, now this is very hard to see, let me find a different example, is that in this ball cap, what you're looking for is, this one was constructed specifically for sewing on ball caps, and what we're looking for is that, if you can see this, the inner two panels of the cap have a reinforced material sewn onto the reverse side of the front two panels. That reinforcement is specifically for embroidery, and it's called the buckram. And what it's good for is that it allows for embroidery directly on them, and that embroidery tends to sew out better because it's much more stable. So you can get caps without this reinforcing material. Generally, what you're seeing here, this is called constructed cap. And actually both of these are constructed caps. This one has its own reinforced material behind it. This one happens to be black, so it doesn't show up on camera. But either way, try and get constructed caps to start out with, because they sew much more easily on an embroidery machine. And then as you master your technique and get to other different kinds of requests from your customer, then go ahead and branch out to non-constructed caps where you don't have the reinforcing inside. So that's my number one recommendation, is be aware of the different kinds of caps that are available and that they may embroider differently. And number two, also be aware that some have the reinforcing inside, which are called constructed caps, and those are the ones that you want to sew on. And then some are not constructed, and they are a little bit more difficult. You can get them to sew just as nicely, but it just adds a little bit more technique. All right. The next tip that I'm going to talk about with embroidering on ball caps has nothing to do with the machine, has nothing to do with the cap, other than the fact that you have to be aware of, this is one of the differences that you want to approach, different approach you want to take when sewing on ball caps. I'm going to step off screen for just a moment here, and I'm going to grab I'm just going to grab some embroidery, an embroidered cap, and we'll look at it here, and we'll talk about this. It's basically all about sewing sequence. So bear with me here. All right, so now let's take a look at an embroidered cap. This is I'm going to sew this typically from left to right. So this word leaf, then filter, we'll sew leaf, then filter. But in embroidery on caps, because of the nature of the way when a cap is on a machine, it's sewing from one side and actually causing a torque and a twist. And then as it sews, it's rotating. That torque and that twist will actually distort the embroidery. So what we do to cancel that out is to divide our design in half and then have it sew from one side, from the middle to one side, then come back to the middle and then sew the rest of the design going the other way. That's what's generally called center out sequencing in the digitizing. So you as the embroiderer don't have to do anything about this, but when you have a design done for caps, you want to make sure that your digitizer, the person who creates the digital file for this, knows to create the sewing order so that the center content sew first, then move out to one side, then the machine stops, cuts, comes back to the middle, and then sews back to the other side. So already without even touching a machine, even if you have a different brand of embroidery machine, these things all are going to apply. As number one, again, different kinds of caps, so be aware that you may have different approaches that we'll talk about in a little bit. Number two is that they're constructed caps and they're non-constructed caps. And also three, you want, if you're sewing on a cap, you want to have it digitized for caps. Now, I'm going to also, I'm also going to let on that the world isn't quite that strict, and you may be wondering, well, I just sewed out on a hat and I didn't have it done center out and it sewed fine. That's great, and what I want to show you here is a logo that won't present these kinds of problems. If you have a logo that's kind of centered, that doesn't have a lot of left and right travel, then you may be able to get away with however the design was sewn out, or however the design was digitized, so it may not have to be center out. But again, if you have a more horizontal design where there's a little bit more travel left to right, maybe 3 or 4 inches wide, then you do, especially with lettering, want to make sure that you're sewing center out. And another thing that expert digitizers will say, and that hopefully when you hire a digitizer, that they also know, this is also go from the bottom to the top. So for example, this logo here has some content at the bottom, including a leaf and then some small lettering here. So what I would do is do the small lettering going from the center to the right, then come back and do either the word filter going left to right, or do leaf going F-A-E-L toward outward. So you're going bottom to top and center out, and that generally helps your sewing sequence, gets things to align. And I'm going to do one more thing too on that in the digitizing style, is that this design is very easy to sew out. You have a little bit of margin where the inside content is a little bit separate from the outside content. Now, if something doesn't align and it's off just a little bit, it's not a big deal. However, items like this where we have a green leaf with some white stem background here that needs to align very precisely. Another point in the digitizing is make sure that I would sew actually the green first, then this white stem background. That way that this area is finished. So another general point in the digitizing is make sure that each area is finished completely before moving on. Your common sense would normally tell you in embroidery and how it's normally done is that you may do all of one color. For example, in this design, if you would sew this for shirts, then you would do the green of the leaf, then come back and do everything else. But in this case, what you would do is do the green of the leaf, then its detail, and finish it before moving on to anything else. It may not change the sequence in this particular case, but if you get what I'm saying, is that you want to finish an entire area, even if it means adding a few extra color changes, because that prevents the design from shifting to somewhere else before you finish the other details. So these procedures, center out, bottom up digitizing, and also making sure that you finish each area first is also is the onus of the digitizer. The digitizer has to understand this. All right, I'm going to go over another point, and again, we've not even gotten to the machine yet. These are things that you can do as an embroiderer managing your project, your ball cap sewing project. Another thing is also getting back a little bit to the different kinds of caps, is that you also want to be aware of the embroidery area of the cap. Too often I get when I've worked help desk in the past is how tall should a cap design be? And the machine that we're looking at here has a 67 millimeter high cap field, or extendable up to about another 10 millimeters. If you translate that out to inches, that's about a 3-inch high cap sewing field, which is pretty impressive. Again, this compact 7-needle happy embroidery machine can do technically a 3-inch, and I said technically, a 3-inch high cap sewing field. And if I rotate this around, we have an even greater sewing field with this large machine here, the 1501, and it has a 72 expandable to 82 millimeter field, actually even out to 9-inch high field. So we're looking at, with today's modern machines, we're looking at pretty significantly high, tall cap sewing fields. Now, as you may be wondering, and what I may be getting at, is that can we take advantage of that entire sewing field? And the answer, unfortunately, is no. So what determines the real cap sewing field is the cap itself. Remember that I hinted at the beginning that we have tall caps and we have what are called medium profile caps, or even at the worst, low profile caps, like fly fisherman caps. Some people may call these trucker hats or farmer hats. Whatever term they are, there are different heights of what's called the riser here on the cap. So the size of this riser here is what determines the sewing area. If you want a universal sewing area, typically about 2.5 inches tall is a safe cap sewing, vertical cap sewing height. However, be aware that you may have to shrink that. Now, on an embroidery machine, like a happy embroidery machine, you can shrink that on the spot. But it's always better to digitize it for the exact size that it needs to be, because the digitizer can make better decisions. So always, a lot of it leans on the digitizing. And then we're going to go over just shortly the stuff that you need to do as the embroiderer to sew on caps. So hopefully we've got a lot of followers here, or that are paying attention, that are finding this useful. Tim, what do we have? We have a few people here that are okay. So thank you guys for paying attention to this, and we hope this is worth it for you all. Now let me finish up this topic here on the sewable height. I actually ran into this personally as a nightmare. I had a couple dozen caps that I had to sew about a week ago, and I'll tell you something. I couldn't get from one cap to the other. They would mess up, and they would parts would not align. And I've been doing this for 17 years, and I couldn't for the life of me understand what I was doing. But the customer had told me that they wanted it sewn in the middle of the cap sewing field, and with the 4-inch high sewing field of the other machine, that meant that the middle was about 2 inches off, which put it right here. And I thought that was a little bit high. Turns out that was the problem. So it's important to know the real sewing field of this. And the real sewing field starts from the bottommost limit, and that's not right at the brim. Most good embroidery machines can sew pretty close. We just don't want to sew right at the brim. And there's a couple reasons why. The most important is that if we deconstruct the cap for a moment, on the inside you have what's called the sweatband, and the sweatband is bonded to the riser here just above the brim, or below the brim with it upside down here at this seam. And it's a pretty thick seam, and you don't want to drive any stitches through there. So if we flip this over, you can actually kind of feel this with my finger on the inside. Even though we're going to unfold the sweatband, you still have that seam. So you've got about a 1/4 inch off the brim at least that you don't want to sew on. So that starts your sewing area. So you're already limiting the 3.5, 4 inches or so. The upper part of the reach of the sewing field depends on where the cap starts falling off the vertical and starts curving towards horizontal. So your real sewing field ends probably right about there if you're seeing this from the side. So I'm going to take a ruler here and let's measure that so we can see that this particular trucker type hat, we're looking a 1/4 inch from the brim, and then we're going up and we're right to where it curves off. So I'm looking at maybe 3 inches tall minus a 1/4 inch, so 2 3/4 inch tall, which isn't bad. We can maybe get a little bit lower than that. Now let's take a look at this medium profile cap. You can see that, I don't know if you can see this by comparison, but you can see that it falls off the vertical sooner. So we're looking at a 1/4 inch from the bottom, and then and we're looking at about 2 3/4 inch where it's here's my 2 3/4 inch mark, and you see above that, that's curving away already, and so we're really doing with about a 1/4 inch less height. So if you're aware of that and you're able to keep your design in that zone, then that's also going to eliminate a lot of problems. Okay, so these are good fundamentals, and it's really important that you're aware that they're, again, in a quick review, there's different kinds of caps. There's constructed and non-constructed caps. Try to start out with constructed caps, and also have the design digitized for caps so to give you the best quality result. And then finally, also be aware of the sewing area of the cap itself. Be aware of where the best zone is to be. That gives you a good start. Without even having to touch your machine, you're already set up and off to the races. I can't tell you how many of our customers either through our fault or just wanted to rush through things, got started before going to class, didn't take this advice and have ruined caps. And we want you to get your caps really as good as possible right off the bat. So follow the fundamentals, and believe me, once you get these down, this becomes a repeatable enough process that cap sewing becomes easy. You don't experience the problems that we've run into for years at the help desk just because they're not paying attention to a few of the fundamentals. Now, this next section here, we're going to talk about actually sewing with the machine itself. And again, this we are showing happy machines here, but some of these are some really good fundamentals too. So let's talk about that. We're going to talk about one specific type of cap hoop, which is the wide cap hoop that is sold with most happy embroidery machines. And this cap hoop has a general purpose, which is to hold the cap onto the hoop in place so that it doesn't shift. And this is now oriented onto the machine. Without setting the machine up, I'm just going to show you that this is now oriented like this on the machine. So it's oriented upside down, so number one, you want to flip the design upside down, but also this is going to shift back and forth. And if you're paying attention here, and if you can see, and I'll turn on a light here so that you can see this a little bit better, is that whereas if you have a shirt that's sewing on here or any other flat good, it's going to be directly in contact with the plate. When the needle comes down, and I'll move this over here so you can see this, when the needle comes down, all right, I'm going to move this back. Okay. Okay, so like I said, when the needle comes down, and well, let's go ahead and just drive it down here. So we'll bring our needle all the way down. The material is trapped between the needle plate and the bottom of the foot, and so the needle drives straight through, no problem. Now, it's different when you put a cap on here, because the cap is raised. No matter how hard you push, it's going to be arced over top of that plate. So you're going to have always a problem with, once the needle comes down through the material, you've got a little bit of an air gap before it goes down to the plate. So that's one of the things we're fighting, and let's talk about some of these ways that we're going to take care of this. All right, so going back to our cap hoop, we're going to get a little bit more specific here, and we're going to zoom in a little bit onto the cap hooping station here. And what we'll do is show you how you properly secure a cap onto that cap hoop. First of all, you're going to use what's called a hooping gauge, and all this is just a station that holds this cap hoop in place. We're going to lock that on. We have 2 clips right here, and we also have a 3rd clip down here. So we lock that on. That holds that from shifting around as we put our cap onto the hoop. We'll now remove the strap, and the strap is covered with teeth that will grip the seam at the base of the cap, so it's important to align that here. So, okay, now what we'll do is we'll grab a blank cap, and one of the things that we're going to do in getting ready is, number 1, flatten your bill. And a little hint here, if you happen to have one of the stiffer caps, not this medium height cap, but one of the tall, stiffer caps, don't be afraid to heat this up a little bit beforehand. That loosens this. This is a standard brush tool cap, so no need to worry about that. Don't worry about working that bill and flattening it. It will curve back. And also, if you have an adjustment, size adjustment on the back, loosen that up as well. And then finally, extend the sweatband out unfold it from the inside of the headband here. And then we're going to slide this onto the cap hoop. And the science here is that we want to hold the material as tightly down so that when it goes to the machine, that sewing surface is as close to the needle plate as possible. So let's do that really quickly, and then that should cover us on cap hooping. One other tip that we're going to throw in here too, another fundamental. How are you on time? 15. 23. Okay, all right. Okay, another fundamental is that we're going to use stabilizer here. Even if we do have a reinforced buckram here, the stabilizer we're going to use is tearaway backing. Only use tearaway, do not use cutaway backing. And we're going to take our tearaway backing and we're going to slide it onto the cap hoop itself. Now this makes it much more visible here, is that there's an important tab that we want to pay attention to. And so here is our backing, tearaway backing, we slide that on, and this little tab that gets highlighted now is known as the build stop. And it's got a little mark here that shows you where center is. And although this doesn't show up very well on camera, there's a center seam on 6-panel hats. If you have a 5-panel hat, you're going to have to manually find that yourself. But 6-panel hats have a nice center seam. Align that with a red mark here. And then we're going to show you something else here that's really important. And this is where hooping on the wide cap hoop, if you get this secret down, then life gets a lot easier. We emphasize this on our YouTube video, but we want to show this to you in another view to maybe help some of you folks at home who are trying to do this. All right, extend your sweatband. And keep that extended, because that's going to slide underneath the bill stop. We'll slide the cap on, and then we'll shift our camera view so you can see what we're doing here. So we'll move the machine itself, and then what we'll do is try and align the camera so that you can see between the bill stop itself, okay, and the bottom of the bill. So what we're seeing here, make sure this is the bottom of the bill. Do not put it past the bill stop like this is bad. You want to make sure that the bottom of the bill stays firmly on top of the bill stop. And also you want to make sure that sweatband also extends. Now notice I'm not being very successful at having the entire sweatband unfold. That's okay, as long as that's unfolded and not doubled to the riser here where you're double sewing on there. So that's really important. So line that up, hold down center, and then here comes the part that makes it easy if you get it all right. So that's our line pre-position. Now once we get this right, everything goes easy from here. So a couple of awkward camera angles here for a moment, and then hopefully we can reposition this, and you'll be able to see this a little bit more easily. All right, so what we're looking at is an extreme side view from the bottom here. All right, this is really important. Okay, so we've got it already so that the bill stop is aligned to the bottom of the bill, and we've got it nicely centered. All right, next thing we want to do is take our right hand. The reason we need our right hand is because this is coming up on the left side, left ear of the cap, and this is going to hold this down. So we're going to need our left hand to do this. So the right hand that's free needs to hold on to the straps or the adjustment straps on the bottom of the cap, and you're putting the tension by pulling this down. That pulls the body of the cap tightly against, not too tight, just the weight of your arm against the curved form of the cap stretcher itself. Keep everything aligned. And what we're trying to align, if you can see, this is the seam at the bottom of the riser of the cap that joins to the sweatband. We're going to take the teeth of this strap and we're going to clamp it down on that seam. So what you're doing, your action here, besides keeping everything aligned up top, is to align this seam with the teeth. If you do this, everything gets easy. So this is where it comes down to it. I'm going to steer this seam to these teeth while we're pulling down. And when we start the section of teeth right here, so we're making sure the teeth are sitting and completely covering that seam. So we don't want the seam out like this. We want the seam trapped completely inside the teeth. And the reason I'm making such a big deal out of it is because if you get this, everything goes really easy from here. So teeth are on the seam. While I'm pulling down with my right hand, I'm pushing the teeth of the strap onto the seam. I'm going to let go with my right hand because now the teeth are holding onto the seam nice and tightly. And now all we have to do is, just like closing a Ziploc bag, just keep our fingers walking that strap all the way around the cap to the other side, doing the same thing on the other side. And that does it. Make sure that, again, on the other side of the right ear, just like the left ear, the teeth are on that seam. And the purpose of this is to keep any text or detail sewing level. The purpose of this strap is that it holds the cap level so that all the parts of the design sew nice and level. Now we're going to go ahead and do our closure on the right side, and that should tighten everything down. That will shift everything up to the right just a little. So make sure your center seam is a little to the left of your center mark, and then that should align up. All right. So if you got that, hopefully we have recorded this, and then you can actually review this on video. And that's a proper way to align a cap so that it's going to sew nicely, both on the front and the sides. All right. Finally, the action that we just did does the job of stretching the base of the cap material backwards, but it does not stretch the top backwards. So that's where we have a pair of clips we're going to grab here. We'll show you how those work. Is that underneath the back of the cap hoop itself are a pair of support posts. So that material goes over the support posts. What we do is pull that material backwards and upwards so that now the material is nice and flat. You don't want to pull it tight, just snug. If you over tighten it, you're going to have problems. Just pull it just snug. Take your clip, which comes with the cap hoop, push it over the posts. It pinches that material and holds it in place and nice and flat. We'll just do that on the other side. And there we have a properly hooped cap that should sew nicely on both the front and the sides if needed for your embroidery machine. So hopefully you've reviewed all those fundamentals, and hopefully this makes sense. We want to make sure that if you have any questions about any of the topics that have gone on, we've got quite a crowd here. We want to make sure that we can get them answered for you. So feel free to add questions on here. This has been Ballcaps Sewing with Happy Embroidery Machines, with general tips for sewing on ball caps, different kinds of ball caps, and just good fundamentals. So hopefully this will be useful for your cap production in your embroidery endeavors. So we'll check for questions. Hang around to see. We are grateful for your participation. Looks like we've got a good group here. Again, we appreciate it very much. Okay. All right. We've got a comment that says it seems like it's a lot of work. And actually, to tell you the truth, I went very, very slowly. So I wanted to explain about the 10 things that are going on, but I think that's a really good challenge here. I do want to show you all how that works. So we'll go ahead and maybe do it at normal speed, just to kind of show you a cap hooping from start to finish, so that you can see that we're just breaking down 4 or 5 things that are happening as we're applying the cap to the hoop. So we'll grab another cap hoop itself. And again, these are designed for commercial business in mind. So it's designed to be fairly fast. So let's go ahead and do this in real time to kind of see. Hopefully you'll see that this is a pretty smooth operation. If you get this down, it's actually pretty quick. We'll slide the cap hoop on to the hooping gauge itself. Take the cap, flatten it out, extend our sweatband. We want a piece of tearaway backing, slide that onto our cap hoop and gauge, and then the hat itself. Slide that around. Grab onto our material. Align everything, push the strap around. Make our closure, pop our clips on. And again, this allows, it's common one that gives you the most flexibility because you're sewing on the front and the sides at the same time. But good comment. We definitely didn't try to make that look fast. We were trying more to emphasize all the different tips that are going on from a professional practice standpoint, so that you guys who are very picky about your embroidery know how to get this done, so that you're doing first-class caps that can be sewn and sold to very, very picky, discerning customers, and do this reliably on different kinds of caps. So we really appreciate that comment, because we do want to take away the difficulty level by, again, going through the different tips. So Mike, that was a structured cap that we were sewing. It would have been a very similar process if it's unstructured, but Mike, since you are bringing up the point structured or unstructured, I'm going to share with you a little tip on unstructured caps. So we have some cap backing here, okay, so I'm going to show you something that I didn't learn until recently. And we're going to pretend that we have unstructured cap here. And I always thought for a long time, why does the parts and accessories department sell a 20-inch long piece of backing when often you only need just enough backing plus a little bit more for your design? Well, I found this out the other day. It's really useful. First of all, what I do with my cap backing is I curl it, just take it against a hard 90-degree edge, and do that same trick we all did in kindergarten for curling a piece of construction paper for little art projects. But take this and wrap it around the base of your cap hoop. But what we're looking for here, and I'm not going to actually hoop the cap, but hoop your cap is normal, but you have this underneath, and then when you're doing your clipping, you now have, the piece is now large enough that, pretend this is underneath your cap, is that when you do your clipping, you're now stabilizing the backing so it doesn't shift, and the cap will be basically basted together to this. and that gives you a more stable base for your non-constructed cap. So 20-inch pieces, piece wide piece of tearaway backing, great for non-constructed caps, or if need be, just tear them into the pieces that you need. So good that you guys are mentioning both constructed and non-constructed caps. Yeah, Mike, good comment. Low profile construction caps are a little bit tricky, so definitely be aware of the different kinds of models of caps. All right, guys, we're going to check in and make sure we've answered questions. If we miss any of your questions, we will answer them here on Facebook. We'll just check to see to make sure we have all the obvious questions answered. Thank you guys for stopping in. And it looks like from your comments, you guys have picked up some good tips here, so we're glad that this has been useful for you all. Okay, last chance for questions. Again, thank you guys for participating, dropping in, making your comments. If you like this setup with Facebook Live and thought that's useful, just let us know. Give us a thumbs up or a like. Send us your feedback and your comments. We are doing this as a sincere intent to try and make the different methods of using your Happy Embroidery machine more accessible to you, and so that you can feel a little bit more comfortable. Pam, thank you. Reba, thank you. Mike, thank you for your participation. Cassie, thank you for joining us. Yuri. George, it's good to see you. Evelyn, Dawn, Timothy, Michelle, and everybody else that I may have missed. I just want to say again, thank you guys for watching our Facebook Live instructional video on sewing on ball caps. We will do more of this if you guys like this enough for our instructional webinars. Thank you all, and see you all next webinar.